She was just my coach, until her hands found a place I didn't know I needed touched. LES uncover what really happened. Coach Thorne. Even her name sounded like a command. Something sharp and unyielding, like the winter wind that whipped across the track during our pre-dawn drills. She wasn't just a coach. She was a presence, a force of nature that filled every space she occupied with a crackling, almost unbearable energy. I'd been on the university athletics team for 2 years, thought I knew the meaning of discipline, of pushing past limits. Then she arrived, a mid-season transfer from some powerhouse institution on the coast, and suddenly my understanding of everything, effort, pain, desire, was recalibrated, thrown into a dizzying, terrifying new orbit. It wasn't just her training methods, though those were notoriously brutal, pushing us to the brink of collapse and then, somehow, beyond it. It was her, the way she moved, a lean, predatory grace. Her dark hair usually pulled back in a severe ponytail that emphasized the sharp, intelligent lines of her face, her eyes a startling, piercing blue that seemed to see right through you, stripping away your pretenses, your excuses, your carefully constructed defenses. I'd find myself watching her during practice, my gaze drawn to her with an almost magnetic force, even as I struggled to keep my lungs from bursting, my muscles from screaming in protest. The way her jaw would clench in concentration as she timed our sprints, the almost imperceptible flare of her nostrils when she was displeased, the way her voice, a low, resonant contralto, could cut through the cacophony of the training facility, a silken lash that demanded, and received, instant obedience. I told myself it was admiration, respect, the natural awe a dedicated athlete feels for a coach who clearly knows her craft, who can extract performances you didn't even know you were capable of. And it was that, certainly. My times improved dramatically under her tutelage, my form became more efficient, my endurance levels soared. I was stronger, faster, better than I had ever been. But there was something else too, something darker, more unsettling. A current that hummed beneath the surface of our interactions, a current I was desperately, futilely, trying to ignore. It was the way her eyes would sometimes linger on me a fraction of a second too long after she'd issued a correction, a look that was both appraising and strangely, disconcertingly, intimate. It was the way her fingers would occasionally brush mine when she handed me a water bottle, a fleeting, accidental contact that would send a jolt of unexpected heat through my system, leaving my skin tingling, my senses reeling. It was her scent, a clean, sharp fragrance like pine needles and winter air, with an underlying hint of something else, something warmer, muskier, something that made my head swim, my stomach clench with a strange, unfamiliar ache. I started to notice the small things, the details that had no bearing on her coaching abilities, yet which seemed to occupy an increasingly disproportionate amount of my mental space. The way a tiny, almost invisible scar curved just above her left eyebrow, a faint white line against her tanned skin. The surprisingly long, elegant fingers that could demonstrate a complex stretch with such fluid grace. The way her lips, usually set in a firm, determined line, would sometimes soften, almost imperceptibly, when she was pleased with our efforts. These observations were like tiny, illicit sparks, igniting a strange, unfamiliar heat within me. A heat I tried to douse with rational thought, with reminders of my boyfriend, Liam, with his easygoing smile and his uncomplicated, predictable affection. I was straight. I had always been straight. My life was a neat, orderly progression, a series of carefully planned steps leading towards a sensible, respectable future. There was no room in that equation for this confusing, unsettling, and increasingly overwhelming fascination with my female coach. And yet, it persisted, it grew, it festered. It became a secret, shameful obsession, a constant, low-level hum of awareness that colored every interaction, every thought, every moment I spent in her formidable, intoxicating presence. The locker room, once a space of easy camaraderie, of shared exhaustion and boisterous laughter, became a new kind of torment. Her presence there, even when she was just passing through, her voice echoing off the tiled walls as she issued instructions or offered encouragement, would send my senses into overdrive. I'd find myself hyper-aware of her, of the way the fabric of her tracksuit clung to her lean, athletic frame, of the subtle sway of her hips as she walked, of the almost predatory intensity in her gaze as she surveyed her domain, her team. I started to dream about her, vivid, confusing dreams that left me waking in the pre-dawn darkness, with a racing heart and a deep, aching sense of longing. A longing I couldn't name, couldn't understand, couldn't escape. It was a dangerous, treacherous path I was treading, a path that led away from everything I had ever known, everything I had ever believed myself to be. And the most terrifying part? A part of me, a reckless, desperate part, didn't want to turn back. It wanted to see where this path led, what lay hidden in the shadows, what secrets, what desires, what terrifying, exhilarating possibilities awaited me in the enigmatic, captivating, and increasingly irresistible orbit of Coach Thorne. The weeks bled into months, and the silent, internal battle I waged against my burgeoning attraction to Coach Thorne intensified, becoming a constant, exhausting undercurrent to my daily life. Her presence was a relentless assault on my senses, a captivating, tormenting force that I found increasingly difficult to ignore, to compartmentalize. Training sessions, once a source of straightforward physical exertion and a healthy dose of competitive adrenaline, transformed into a complex, emotionally charged arena. Every correction she offered, every demonstration of proper form, every sharp, incisive command, felt laden with a subtext that was probably entirely of my own making, yet which resonated deep within me, stirring a confusing cocktail of fear, shame, and an undeniable, intoxicating excitement. When she would physically adjust my stance, her hands firm and cool on my shoulders, her body close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her, smell that sharp, clean scent of pine and winter air, my breath would catch in my throat, my muscles tensing not from exertion, but from a desperate, internal effort to remain impassive, to betray none of the turmoil that raged within. Her fingers, those long, elegant fingers, would linger for a fraction of a second too long, her touch sending a jolt of pure, unadulterated electricity through my system, a sensation that was both exquisitely pleasurable and profoundly, terrifyingly, wrong. I'd find myself replaying these moments in my mind, over and over, dissecting every nuance, every gesture, searching for some hidden meaning, some reciprocal sign of acknowledgement, however faint, however imagined. Did her eyes soften, just for a moment, when they met mine? Was there a subtle hesitation in her voice when she spoke my name? Or was I simply projecting my own desperate, forbidden desires onto her, a blank canvas upon which I painted the lurid, impossible landscape of my own confused heart? The locker room became an even more potent arena for this silent, agonizing drama. The air, thick with the scent of chlorine and sweat and a dozen different brands of shampoo, would become charged, electric, the moment she entered. I'd watch her from beneath lowered lashes, my gaze drawn to her with an almost magnetic force, even as I feigned nonchalance, pretending to be engrossed in a conversation with a teammate, or meticulously organizing the contents of my locker. The way the fabric of her damp towel clung to the curve of her hip as she dried herself after a shower, the surprisingly vulnerable line of her neck when her hair was still wet, slicked back from her face, the almost predatory grace with which she moved through the crowded, steamy space. Every detail was seared into my consciousness, a forbidden, intoxicating imprint. I started to make excuses to linger in the locker room, to forget something, to take longer than usual to change, just to catch a few extra, stolen glimpses of her, to breathe in the lingering trace of her scent, to feel the subtle shift in the atmosphere her presence created. These small, almost pathetic, acts of self-sabotage were a source of both intense shame and a perverse, undeniable thrill. I was playing with fire, I knew, dancing on the razor's edge of a dangerous, forbidden precipice. But the flame, the darkness, the intoxicating allure of the unknown, it was becoming increasingly, irresistibly compelling. My relationship with Liam, my perfectly nice, perfectly boring boyfriend, began to fray at the edges. Our conversations felt strained, artificial, punctuated by long, awkward silences that were filled, on my end at least, with the unspoken, unacknowledged presence of Coach Thorne. He sensed the distance, the change in me, though he couldn't name its cause. He became more attentive, more solicitous, his efforts to bridge the widening chasm between us only serving to highlight the uncomfortable truth of my own emotional infidelity. The guilt was a constant, gnawing companion, a bitter taste in my mouth, a heavy weight on my conscience. I was deceiving him, betraying him, with every beat of my confused, treacherous heart. And yet, I couldn't stop. I couldn't control the direction of my thoughts, my desires, my increasingly overwhelming obsession with the enigmatic, captivating woman who was my coach. The dreams intensified, becoming more vivid, more explicit, filled with images of her, of us, that left me waking in the pre-dawn darkness. My body aching with a desire so intense it felt like a physical wound, the sheets tangled around me, the lingering scent of her, real or imagined, filling my senses. The line between fantasy and reality was blurring, my carefully constructed world tilting precariously on its axis. I tried to confide in my closest teammate, Sarah, a bubbly, uncomplicated girl with whom I had always shared an easy camaraderie. But how could I articulate the maelstrom of emotions that raged within me? How could I explain this terrifying, exhilarating, all-consuming fascination with our coach? The words wouldn't come. They felt too big, too dangerous, too forbidden. So, I kept it hidden, a secret, burning ember in the core of my being, a constant, low-grade fever that colored every interaction, every thought, every moment I spent in her formidable, intoxicating presence. The end-of-season banquet, a typically raucous affair held in the university's cavernous dining hall, became the unlikely stage for the next act in this unfolding drama. I had almost decided not to go. The thought of an entire evening spent in such close proximity to Coach Thorne, of having to maintain a facade of casual indifference, while my insides churned with a potent cocktail of desire and dread, was almost too much to bear. But Sarah had cajoled, pleaded, and finally, guilt-tripped me into attending. "Come on, Alex," she'd said, her bright, innocent eyes filled with an exasperating, unwavering optimism. "It'll be fun. A chance to let our hair down, to celebrate all our hard work. And besides," she'd added, with a sly, knowing wink, "Coach Thorne will be there. Don't you want to see her out of her tracksuit for once?" The thought, as terrifying as it was also undeniably, perversely, compelling. To see Coach Thorne in a different context, stripped of her usual athletic attire, her usual aura of stern professional authority, it was an irresistible lure. And so, I found myself, a few hours later, standing awkwardly in a corner of the crowded, noisy dining hall, nursing a lukewarm glass of punch, my heart hammering against my ribs, my eyes scanning the room with a desperate, anxious intensity. And then I saw her, and the world, or at least my perception of it, tilted once more, irrevocably, on its axis. She wasn't wearing a tracksuit. She was wearing a dress. A simple, elegant, black dress that clung to her lean, athletic frame in a way that was both sophisticated and devastatingly, unexpectedly, sensual. Her dark hair, usually pulled back in that severe ponytail, was down, falling in soft, artless waves around her shoulders, framing a face that, without the usual stern lines of concentration, looked softer, younger, almost vulnerable. She was talking to the university's athletic director, a portly, balding man whose eyes seemed to be permanently fixed on a point somewhere just above her collarbone. But her attention, her real attention, seemed to be elsewhere. Her gaze, those startling, piercing blue eyes, swept across the room, and for a fraction of a second, they met mine. And in that moment, in that brief, electrifying exchange, I saw something that made my breath catch, my entire body jolt with a sudden, powerful surge of recognition. It wasn't just admiration I saw in her eyes. It wasn't just professional acknowledgement. It was something else. Something darker. Something deeper. Something that mirrored the turmoil, the longing, the forbidden desire that raged within my own confused, treacherous heart. The athletic banquet, with its forced gaiety and the lingering scent of overcooked chicken and cheap wine, became the unlikely backdrop for a subtle, almost imperceptible, escalation in the silent, charged dance between Coach Thorne and myself. That brief, electrifying moment of eye contact, a moment that had felt laden with an unspoken, almost illicit, understanding, had left me shaken, my carefully constructed composure threatening to shatter like cheap glass. I tried to focus on the conversations around me, on Sarah's animated chatter, on the congratulatory speeches droning on from the podium, but my awareness of Coach Thorne was a constant, distracting hum, a magnetic force that pulled my gaze, my thoughts, into its orbit, regardless of my desperate attempts to resist. She was seated at the head table, a figure of quiet, understated elegance amidst the more boisterous, self-congratulatory posturing of the university's athletic department heads. She didn't speak much, her contributions to the surrounding conversations brief, incisive, her gaze often drifting, as if her thoughts were elsewhere, in some distant, more compelling landscape. And sometimes, just sometimes, I would feel her eyes on me, a fleeting, intense scrutiny that would send a jolt of unexpected heat through my system, making my skin prickle, my pulse quicken. I'd quickly look away, my cheeks burning, a ridiculous, unwarranted blush creeping up my neck, terrified that she might see the turmoil, the longing, the forbidden desire that I was so desperately, futilely, trying to hide. The evening wore on, a blur of lukewarm food, tedious speeches, and the increasingly boisterous laughter of my teammates as the wine flowed more freely. I nursed my single glass of punch, the overly sweet liquid doing little to soothe the knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach, the strange, unfamiliar ache that seemed to have taken up permanent residence in my chest. I needed to escape, to find a moment of solitude, to gather my scattered thoughts, to try and regain some semblance of control over the maelstrom of emotions that raged within me. Making a mumbled excuse to Sarah, I slipped away from our table and headed towards the relative quiet of the antechamber, a dimly lit space filled with overflowing coat racks and the faint, lingering scent of damp wool and stale perfume. I found a quiet corner, hidden behind a large potted fern that looked as if it had seen better days, and leaned against the cool painted wall, closing my eyes, taking a deep, shaky breath. The muffled sounds of the banquet, the clatter of cutlery, the murmur of voices, the occasional burst of laughter, seemed to seep through the closed doors, a distant, irrelevant echo of a world I no longer felt a part of. My own world had shrunk, narrowed, condensed into the singular, all-consuming reality of Coach Thorne, of the strange, unsettling, and increasingly irresistible pull I felt towards her. Hiding? Her voice, that low, resonant contralto, so close, so unexpected, made me jump, my eyes snapping open, my heart leaping into my throat. She was standing a few feet away, her tall, elegant figure silhouetted against the dim light of the hallway, her arms crossed, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. "Coach Thorne," I stammered, my mind scrambling to regain some semblance of composure. I just needed some air. It can get rather oppressive in there, can't it?" she murmured, her gaze unwavering, her blue eyes, even in the dim light, seeming to burn with an unnerving, predatory intensity. All that forced conviviality. She took a step closer, and then another, until she was standing directly in front of me, so close I could feel the warmth radiating from her body. So close I could smell the subtle, intoxicating fragrance of her perfume, a clean, sharp scent, like pine needles and winter air, now overlaid with something else, something warmer, muskier, something that made my head swim, my senses reel. Are you enjoying the banquet, Lena? She asked, her voice dropping even lower, almost to a whisper, a silken, seductive sound that seemed to wrap around me, drawing me closer, closer. She used my name, and the intimacy of it, spoken in that low, husky timbre, in this secluded, shadowy space, sent a fresh wave of shivers through me. It's fine, I managed, my voice a little shaky, a little breathless. The understatement was so profound it was almost laughable. Fine? My entire world was tilting on its axis, my carefully constructed identity crumbling into dust, and she was asking me if I was enjoying the banquet. Her smile widened, just a fraction, and this time it did reach her eyes, igniting a faint, unsettling glimmer in their blue depths, a glimmer that looked an awful lot like understanding. Or was it complicity? Just fine? She purred, her voice a silken caress. I had hoped, perhaps, for something a little more enthusiastic. She leaned in, just slightly, her movement fluid, almost serpentine, the fabric of her black dress whispering softly in the still, heavy air. Her scent enveloped me, a heady, intoxicating cloud, making my head swim, my senses reel. Her lips, those perfectly shaped, surprisingly full lips, were inches from mine. I could feel her warm breath on my skin, a soft, insistent caress. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I was sure she could hear it. I closed my eyes, a silent, complete surrender. The world tilted, dissolved, reformed. There was only this moment, this shadowy antechamber, this woman, and the terrifying, exhilarating, irresistible abyss of her desire, an abyss that I was. I suddenly realized, with a clarity that was both shocking and profoundly liberating, about to willingly, recklessly, plunge into. The air in the antechamber, already thick with the scent of damp wool and stale perfume, now crackled with an entirely different kind of energy, a raw, almost unbearable tension that vibrated between Coach Thorne and myself. Her proximity was overwhelming, her perfume a dizzying, intoxicating cloud that seemed to seep into my very pores, scrambling my thoughts, short-circuiting my carefully constructed defenses. Her lips, those perfectly shaped, surprisingly full lips, were a breath away from mine, a silent, tantalizing promise of a pleasure so profound, so forbidden, that it made my entire body tremble, with a mixture of fear and a desperate, reckless anticipation. I could feel the warmth of her body, the subtle rise and fall of her chest as she breathed, each exhalation a soft, warm caress against my skin. My own breath hitched in my throat, a ragged, uneven rhythm that betrayed the turmoil raging within me. Lena, she whispered, her voice a low, husky murmur, my name on her lips, a spell, an incantation, a key unlocking a hidden chamber within me, a chamber filled with desires I hadn't known I possessed, desires that were now clamoring for release, for acknowledgement, for her. Her eyes, those startling, piercing blue orbs, held mine captive, their gaze unwavering, intense, as if she were trying to read my very soul, to gauge the precise moment when my fear would yield to my desire, when my carefully constructed morality would crumble beneath the weight of my desperation, my curiosity, my need. I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that this was it, the precipice, the point of no return. The moment where a single word, a single gesture, could change everything, irrevocably and forever. And I knew, with a clarity that was both shocking and profoundly liberating, what I had to do, what I wanted to do. The carefully constructed walls I had built around my heart, around my desires, the walls that had begun to crumble weeks ago, now dissolved completely, leaving me exposed, raw, vulnerable. Coach, I breathed, the word a fragile, hesitant whisper, a last, fleeting acknowledgement of the boundary we were about to obliterate. A slow, predatory smile curved her lips, a smile of triumph, of satisfaction, of a dawning, dangerous, exhilarating complicity. Her eyes seemed to glow with an inner fire. Yes, Lena? She purred, her voice a silken caress, a seductive, irresistible poison. And then, she closed the small gap that remained between us, and her mouth found mine. The first touch of her lips was soft, almost tentative, a question. But there was no hesitation in my response. I met her kiss with an answering hunger, a desperate, urgent need that had been building within me for weeks, for months, for what felt like an eternity. The kiss deepened, quickly, fiercely, a desperate exploration of mouths and senses, a raw, untamed expression of a desire that had been suppressed for too long. Her tongue, surprisingly bold, delved into my mouth, a silken, knowing invader that mapped the sensitive contours, igniting fires I hadn't known existed. I responded in kind, my own tongue meeting hers in a desperate, urgent dance, a silent, passionate conversation that transcended words. A low groan rumbled in her chest, a sound that was both an admission of pleasure and a cry of surrender. I melted into her, my arms snaking around her neck, my fingers tangling in the silky strands of her dark hair, pulling her closer until there was no space left between us, until our bodies were pressed together, a desperate, searing embrace. Her hands, those strong, capable hands that could demonstrate a complex athletic maneuver with such fluid grace, now moved with a different kind of purpose, a different kind of expertise. They slid from my face, down my neck, her fingers tracing the line of my collarbone, sending shivers of illicit pleasure coursing through me. One hand found its way to the small of my back, pressing me tighter against her, while the other moved with a slow, deliberate confidence to the curve of my hip, her thumb stroking the sensitive skin there in a way that made my breath catch, my entire body jolt with a sudden, powerful surge of awareness. The world outside, the muffled sounds of the banquet, the distant, irrelevant echo of a life I no longer recognized, ceased to exist. There was only this shadowy antechamber, this woman, her mouth on mine, her hands on my body, her scent filling my senses, her presence overwhelming me, consuming me, body and soul. This was madness. Glorious, terrifying, exhilarating madness. A surrender to a desire so profound, so elemental, that it threatened to shatter the very foundations of my existence. And in that moment, bathed in the dim, forgiving light of the antechamber, the taste of her on my lips, the feel of her body pressed against mine, the sound of her ragged breathing, a symphony in my ears, I knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified me, that I was lost. Utterly, irrevocably, beautifully lost. And I never, ever, wanted to be found. The intoxicating reality of Coach Thorne's kiss, the firm pressure of her body against mine, sent my carefully ordered world into a dizzying, exhilarating tailspin. Her hands, which had been exploring the curve of my hip, now moved with a new, more daring, confidence. One hand slid upwards, her palm gliding over my ribs, her fingers brushing against the underside of my breast, a teasing, tantalizing exploration that made me gasp against her mouth. The fabric of my dress, a thin, silky material I had chosen with a subconscious, perhaps, desire to feel feminine, desirable, suddenly felt like an unbearable constraint, a barrier between my skin and hers. Her other hand, the one that had been pressed against the small of my back, now moved lower, her fingers tracing the curve of my buttock, her grip firm, possessive, pulling me even tighter against her, until I could feel the undeniable, startling evidence of her own arousal pressing against my stomach. A jolt of pure, unadulterated electricity shot through me, a sensation so intense, so unexpected, that it almost buckled my knees. My mind, already reeling from the onslaught of new, forbidden sensations, struggled to process this new reality, this undeniable evidence of a shared reciprocal desire. She was aroused. Coach Thorne, my coach, this formidable, enigmatic, and, until recently, seemingly untouchable woman, was aroused by me. The thought was both terrifying and intoxicatingly, overwhelmingly empowering. A fresh wave of heat washed over me, pooling low in my belly, igniting a fierce, primal hunger that matched her own. My own hands, which had been tangled in her hair, now began their own exploration, sliding down her back, feeling the lean, strong muscles beneath the elegant black fabric of her dress, the delicate tracery of her spine. Her skin was warm, surprisingly soft, incredibly alive beneath my touch. She moaned softly, a low, guttural sound that vibrated through me, fueling my own escalating arousal, driving me to a new level of desperation. The kiss deepened, becoming more urgent, more demanding, a raw, untamed expression of a desire that had been suppressed for too long, a desire that was now threatening to consume us both in its incandescent, all-consuming flame. We stumbled, a tangle of limbs and expensive fabric, our mouths still locked, and found ourselves pressed against the cool, painted wall of the antechamber, the rough texture a stark, grounding contrast to the heat that was consuming us. Her leg, strong and athletic, insinuated itself between mine, her thigh pressing against the sensitive juncture of my legs, sending a fresh wave of exquisite torment, of an almost unbearable pleasure, radiating through my core. I cried out, a small, strangled sound, my head falling back against the wall, exposing my throat, a gesture of complete and utter submission. She took advantage of my vulnerability, her lips leaving mine to trace a searing path down my neck, her teeth nipping gently at the sensitive skin, eliciting a fresh wave of shivers, of an almost painful pleasure. "Lena," she murmured, against my skin, her voice a low, husky growl, a sound that vibrated through me, igniting every nerve ending. "You feel incredible." Her words, a validation of the desire that had consumed me for so long, were like fuel to the fire. I wanted more. I needed more. My hands fumbled with the zipper of her dress, my fingers clumsy, uncoordinated, driven by a desperate, urgent need to feel her skin against mine, to eliminate the last, frustrating barrier between us. She helped me, her own hands covering mine, guiding them, until the zipper finally gave way, the sound surprisingly loud in the charged silence of the antechamber. The fabric parted, and I pushed the dress off her shoulders, letting it fall to the floor in a pool of elegant black silk, a forgotten casualty of our escalating passion. Her skin, in the dim, forgiving light, was even more beautiful than I had imagined, smooth and pale, with the subtle, intriguing tracery of faint scars and old athletic injuries, each one a testament to a life lived with passion, with intensity, with a fierce, unwavering determination. She wore no bra, and her breasts, full and firm, their nipples dark, erect, were beaded with a fine sheen of perspiration. They were an invitation, a dare, a promise of a pleasure so profound, so forbidden, that it made my head swim, my senses reel. I lowered my head, my mouth finding her breast, my tongue tracing the outline of her nipple, then laving, suckling, gently at first, then with increasing urgency. She cried out, a raw, keening sound that was swallowed by the dim, indifferent antechamber, her fingers tangling in my hair, her hips bucking against mine in a frantic, desperate rhythm. The world narrowed to this single, incandescent point of contact, to the feel of her body moving beneath mine, to the sound of her ragged breathing, to the intoxicating scent of her arousal. Nothing else mattered. There was only this fierce, desperate, beautiful act of mutual surrender. Her hands, those strong, capable hands, were now at the hem of my own dress, her fingers fumbling with the delicate fabric, her touch sending fresh waves of heat coursing through me. I helped her, eager to shed the last barrier between us, my body trembling with anticipation. And then, we were skin to skin, flesh to flesh, our bodies pressed together in the dim, shadowy intimacy of that forgotten antechamber, the muffled sounds of the banquet outside a distant, irrelevant echo to the storm that raged within. This was more than just a physical act. It was a consummation, a merging of two souls who had been circling each other for months, drawn together by an invisible, irresistible force. And as she pulled me closer, her lips finding mine once more, I knew, with a terrifying, exhilarating certainty, that this moment, this night, would change everything, irrevocably and forever. The cool paint of the antechamber wall was a stark contrast to the fire consuming us, a grounding sensation in a world that had otherwise dissolved into pure, unadulterated feeling. Coach Thorne's body, now gloriously, unashamedly bare against mine, was a landscape of lean muscle and surprising softness, a testament to years of discipline and an underlying, potent femininity that she usually kept so carefully veiled. Her skin tasted of salt and that faint, intoxicating perfume, a flavor that was rapidly becoming an addiction. My hands roamed her back, her sides, the curve of her hips, memorizing her shape, imprinting the feel of her onto my fingertips. Her own hands were equally adventurous, equally demanding. They explored the contours of my body with a confidence that was both thrilling and a little intimidating. Her fingers traced the line of my spine, sending shivers of exquisite pleasure down to the very tips of my toes. They cupped my breasts, her thumbs stroking my already hardened nipples, eliciting soft, involuntary moans that seemed to fuel her own escalating arousal. The air in the antechamber was thick with our mingled scents, with the sound of our ragged breathing, with the almost unbearable tension of our shared, desperate need. The muffled sounds of the banquet outside, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, the droning speeches, they were a distant, irrelevant counterpoint to the raw, primal symphony unfolding within these four shadowy walls. Her mouth left mine, her lips trailing a searing path down my throat, to the sensitive hollow between my collarbones, then lower, to the valley between my breasts. Her tongue, hot and wet, flicked against my skin, sending jolts of pure, unadulterated electricity through my entire being. I arched against her, my head thrown back, my fingers clenching in her dark, silky hair, a silent plea for more, for everything. She seemed to understand, her movements becoming more urgent, more demanding. Her leg, still pressed between mine, began to move, a slow, deliberate friction that sent spirals of exquisite torment, of an almost unbearable pleasure, radiating through my core. I was on fire, every nerve ending screaming, my body a taut, quivering bowstring of desire, rapidly approaching its breaking point. Thorn? I gasped, the name, her surname, a raw, broken sound on my lips, a desperate acknowledgement of the power she held over me, the power she was now so exquisitely, so devastatingly, wielding. A low growl rumbled in her chest, a sound of pure primal satisfaction. Her eyes, those startling, piercing blue orbs, dark and dilated in the dim light, met mine, and I saw a reflection of my own fierce, untamed hunger in their depths. There was no pretense now, no carefully constructed masks, only the raw, unadulterated truth of our shared, forbidden desire. Her hand, the one that had been exploring my back, now slid lower, her fingers tracing the curve of my hip, then moving inwards, towards the sensitive, aching core of me. I gasped, my body arching off the wall, a silent invitation, a desperate plea. Her fingers, slick with our mingled perspiration, found the damp heat between my thighs, parting the delicate folds, finding the swollen, throbbing nub of my clitoris. Her touch was electric, a shockwave that made me cry out, a raw, keening sound that was swallowed by the indifferent antechamber. She didn't stop there. Her fingers moved with a skill, a precision, that bespoke a deep, intuitive understanding of the female body, of my body. She knew just where to touch, just how much pressure to apply, just how to vary the rhythm, the intensity, to coax from me a response that was both a surrender and a fierce, untamed assertion of my own burgeoning desire. I was writhing against her, my hips bucking, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps, my body a taut, quivering conduit of pure, unadulterated pleasure. The sounds that escaped my lips were no longer words, just raw, primal expressions of an ecstasy so profound it was almost unbearable. And then, I felt it. The first, subtle tremor, the telltale clenching of my inner muscles, the sharp, indrawn breath that signaled the approaching release. Thorn, I gasped, my voice a ragged, broken plea. I'm going to. Let go, Lena. She whispered against my skin, her voice a low, husky command, her own breath hot and ragged. Let go for me. And I did. With a final, desperate surge of movement, a guttural cry torn from my throat, the world exploded in a blinding flash of white-hot pleasure, a shattering, transcendent release that left me gasping, trembling, my body convulsing in a series of shuddering aftershocks. I clung to her, anchoring myself in the eye of the storm, tears of pure, unadulterated ecstasy streaming down my face. She held me close, her own body still trembling, her breath hot and ragged against my ear, whispering soft, soothing words, words of comfort, of shared release, words that were lost in the overwhelming tide of sensation and emotion. As the waves subsided, leaving me limp and sated, my body humming with a languid, delicious exhaustion, she shifted, her weight resting lightly against me, her arms still wrapped around me in a protective, possessive embrace. We stood like that for a long moment, tangled in a heap of discarded clothing and raw emotion, the silence in the antechamber now filled with a profound sense of peace, of completion. The muffled sounds of the banquet, which had faded into an irrelevant background hum during the height of our passion, now began to reassert themselves, a harsh, unwelcome intrusion of reality into our private, illicit sanctuary. A cold knot of anxiety began to form in my stomach, a stark contrast to the lingering warmth that still suffused my body. What had we done? What were the consequences? The questions, which had been so easily, so recklessly, dismissed in the heat of the moment, now loomed large, ominous, terrifying. Coach Thorne, as if sensing my dawning unease, tightened her embrace, her lips brushing against my temple, a soft, reassuring caress. "Shh," she murmured, her voice a low, soothing balm against the raw edges of my fear. "It's all right, Lena. It's all right." But was it? Was it really all right? Or had we just opened a Pandora's box of forbidden desires, of complicated emotions, of potentially devastating consequences, a box that could never, ever be closed again? The languid peace that had settled over us in the aftermath of our shared release was fragile, easily shattered by the encroaching sounds of the world outside our shadowy antechamber. The muffled laughter from the banquet hall, the distant clinking of glasses, each sound was a tiny hammer blow against the delicate bubble of our illicit intimacy. Coach Thorne's arms were still around me, a warm, possessive embrace that should have felt comforting, but now, in the cold light of dawning reality, it felt dangerous, complicated. Her breath, still a little ragged, fanned across my hair, and I could feel the steady, reassuring beat of her heart against my back. But my own heart was beginning to pound with a different kind of rhythm, a rhythm of anxiety, of dawning regret, of a terrifying, overwhelming uncertainty. We should probably get dressed," I whispered, my voice hoarse, unsteady, the words feeling ridiculously inadequate, almost absurd, in the face of what had just transpired between us. She didn't respond immediately. For a long moment, she just held me, her embrace tightening almost imperceptibly, as if she were reluctant to let go, to break the spell, to return to the world of rules and consequences, and carefully constructed facades. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken regrets, she loosened her hold, her hands lingering for a moment on my shoulders before dropping away, leaving my skin feeling suddenly, strangely, cold. Yes, she said, her voice low, devoid of its earlier passion, now tinged with a weariness that mirrored my own. You're right. We moved apart, slowly, awkwardly, the few feet of space that now separated us feeling like a vast, yawning chasm. The dim light of the antechamber, which had seemed so forgiving, so intimate, just moments before, now felt harsh, exposing, highlighting the disarray of our discarded clothing, the flush on our skin, the lingering telltale signs of our shared transgression. I avoided her eyes as I fumbled for my dress, my fingers clumsy, uncoordinated. The silky fabric felt alien against my still sensitized skin, a constricting shroud, a return to a self I no longer recognized, a self I wasn't sure I could ever inhabit again. I could feel her gaze on me, a heavy, unreadable scrutiny, but I didn't dare look up, didn't dare meet her eyes, afraid of what I might see there. Regret? Disappointment? Or worse, a cool, professional indifference that would shatter the fragile remnants of the intimacy we had shared. She, too, was dressing, her movements economical, almost minimalist, her usual aura of cool, controlled competence slowly reasserting itself, like a suit of armor being donned piece by piece. The silence in the antechamber stretched, thick and heavy, filled with unspoken words, with unvoiced fears, with the dawning, terrifying realization of the enormity of what we had done. Lena, she said finally, her voice quiet but firm, her gaze meeting mine with a new, unsettling intensity. The passion was gone, replaced by something else, something harder, more resolute. What happened here? It can never happen again. Her words, though not unexpected, were like a physical blow, each one landing with a sharp, painful impact. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones. This was it. The rejection. The drawing of the line. The inevitable, brutal return to reality. I understand. I managed, though the words felt like a lie. I didn't understand. My heart was screaming in protest. My body ached with a desire that was far from sated, a desire that now felt shameful, illicit, wrong. Do you? She asked, her voice gentle but firm. Because I need you to understand. I am your coach. You are my athlete. There are boundaries that cannot, must not, be crossed. What happened here was a violation of those boundaries, and it put us both in an incredibly precarious position. She paused, taking a deep breath, her blue eyes, usually so piercing, now clouded with a profound sadness, a deep regret. I value my career, Lena, and I value your future, your potential. Neither can be jeopardized by a moment of madness. A moment of madness. Was that all it had been to her? A foolish, regrettable impulse? The thought was like a knife twisting in my gut. But you said, I blurted out, unable to stop myself, the memory of her whispered endearments, of her passionate surrender, still so vivid, so real, in my mind. You said it was incredible. Her gaze softened, and for the first time since we had broken our embrace, I saw a flicker of the vulnerability she usually kept so carefully hidden. Oh, Lena, she sighed, her voice filled with a profound weariness. It was incredible, more incredible than I could have ever imagined, but that doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it possible. She leaned forward, her eyes pleading for understanding. What I felt, what I still feel, is complicated, confusing, and ultimately irrelevant. What matters is doing the right thing. And the right thing, the only thing, is to ensure that this goes no further. That we forget this ever happened. Forget this ever happened? How could I forget? How could I erase the memory of her touch, her taste, her scent, the way my body had come alive beneath hers, the way our souls had seemed to connect in that brief, incandescent moment of shared release? The thought was unbearable, A cruel, impossible demand. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I fought them back, determined not to break down in front of her, determined to salvage some shred of dignity from the wreckage of my shattered emotions. So, this conversation, I said, my voice trembling slightly, is just to tell me it's over? That it was nothing? A sad smile touched her lips. It was far from nothing, Lena, she said softly. But yes, it has to be over, before it truly begins. For both our sakes. She paused, her gaze searching mine. Can you do that? Can you go back to being my athlete, and I, your coach? Can we pretend that this antechamber never existed? Can I pretend? My mind screamed no. My heart ached with a pain so intense it was almost physical. But looking into her eyes, seeing the genuine distress, the weight of responsibility she carried, the unwavering resolve that was slowly, inexorably, extinguishing the last, flickering embers of hope within me, I knew I had no choice. To fight, to push, would only cause more pain, more potential damage. It would achieve nothing but our mutual destruction. Yes, I whispered, the word tasting like defeat, like ash, like the bitter, irretrievable loss of something precious, something beautiful, something I hadn't even known I possessed until it was already gone. I can pretend. But as I turned to leave that shadowy antechamber, to return to the bright, oblivious lights of the banquet hall, to the life I no longer recognized, to the self I no longer knew, I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I was lying. I could never forget. I could never pretend. The memory of Coach Thorne, of her kiss, of her touch, of the storm we had weathered, the storm we had created, would be etched into my soul forever. A beautiful, terrible, unforgettable secret. The return to the bright, clamorous reality of the banquet hall was a jarring, disorienting experience. The laughter seemed too loud, the lights too harsh, the forced conviviality almost unbearable. I felt like an alien, a creature from another world, dropped unceremoniously into a scene of mundane, oblivious revelry. My skin still tingled from Coach Thorne's touch. My lips still throbbed with the memory of her kiss. My body still hummed with the aftershocks of our shared passion. Yet, I had to plaster a smile on my face, had to nod and chat and pretend that my entire universe hadn't just been shattered and reassembled in a shadowy antechamber. Sarah, my teammate, greeted me with a concerned frown. "Where have you been? You look flushed. Are you okay?" Flushed. That was an understatement. I felt as if I were radiating heat, as if the illicit fire that had consumed Coach Thorne and me was still burning within me, visible to anyone who cared to look closely enough. Just needed some air. I mumbled, avoiding her gaze, acutely aware of the lie, of the chasm that had just opened up between us, between me and the rest of the world. I saw Coach Thorne re-enter the hall a few minutes later, her composure flawless, her expression unreadable, her elegant black dress perfectly in place. She resumed her seat at the head table, exchanging polite pleasantries with the athletic director, her demeanor a masterpiece of cool, professional detachment. If she was affected by what had just transpired between us, she showed no outward sign. It was as if the antechamber, the storm, the raw, uninhibited passion had never existed. Or perhaps, I tortured myself thinking, it simply hadn't meant as much to her as it had to me. That thought, more than anything, was a cold, sharp pain in my chest. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and meaningless chatter. I went through the motions, accepted congratulations on our team's performance, even managed a few weak jokes. But my mind was elsewhere, lost in the intoxicating, terrifying memory of Coach Thorne's embrace, of the forbidden intimacy we had shared. When the banquet finally, mercifully ended, I made my escape as quickly as possible, eager to be alone, to try and process the maelstrom of emotions that raged within me. The walk back to the dorms, through the cool, crisp night air, did little to clear my head. If anything, the solitude only amplified the turmoil, the confusion, the overwhelming sense of loss. The next few weeks were a period of excruciating adjustment. Seeing Coach Thorne at practice was a new kind of torment. The professional mask she wore was impenetrable, her demeanor cool, distant, almost clinical. There were no more lingering glances, no more accidental touches, no more shared, secret smiles. It was as if the antechamber, and everything that had happened within its shadowy confines, had been erased from her memory, or at least, from her outward behavior. But it hadn't been erased from mine. Every time I saw her, every time I heard her voice, every time I caught the faint, lingering scent of her perfume, the memories would come flooding back, vivid, potent, intoxicating. The feel of her skin beneath my fingertips, the taste of her lips, the sound of her ragged breathing, the raw, uninhibited cries of her pleasure, these sensations were seared into my consciousness, a constant, tormenting reminder of what I had experienced, of what I had lost. I tried to focus on my training, to channel my frustration, my confusion, my longing, into physical exertion. I pushed myself harder than ever before, driven by a desperate, almost manic energy. My performance on the track soared, but my internal landscape was a wasteland of conflicting emotions. Liam, my boyfriend, noticed the change in me, the distance, the preoccupation. He tried to reach out, to understand, but I couldn't confide in him. How could I explain the inexplicable? How could I articulate the truth of my own shattered identity, of my forbidden, all-consuming desire for another woman, for my coach? Our relationship, already strained, began to unravel completely. The easy, comfortable affection we had once shared was replaced by a painful, awkward tension, by unspoken accusations and unvoiced resentments. It was a slow, agonizing death, and I knew with a heavy heart that it was inevitable. I was changing, transforming, into someone he no longer recognized, someone I no longer recognized. The Lena who had been so certain of her straightness, of her future, of her place in the world, was gone, replaced by this new, uncertain, and profoundly, terrifyingly, alive creature. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling practice session, Coach Thorne called me into her office. My heart hammered against my ribs, a familiar, frantic rhythm. Was this it? Was she going to confront me? Acknowledge what had happened? Or was this just another routine discussion about my training schedule, another professional interaction designed to reinforce the boundaries, to erase the memory of our shared transgression? Her office was small, impersonal, filled with the scent of liniment and stale coffee, a stark contrast to the shadowy, intimate antechamber where our lives had so irrevocably collided. She was sitting behind her desk, her expression unreadable, her blue eyes, those startling, piercing orbs, fixed on mine. "Lena," she began, her voice cool, professional. "I wanted to talk to you about your performance. You've been exceptional lately. Your times are improving dramatically. You're focused. Determined." "Thank you, Coach," I managed, my voice barely a whisper, my eyes fixed on a point somewhere just past her left shoulder. "But," she continued, her voice softening almost imperceptibly, "I've also noticed a certain intensity, a recklessness, almost. You're pushing yourself too hard. You're going to burn out, or worse, get injured." She paused, her gaze unwavering. "Is everything all right, Lena? Is there something you want to talk about?" The question hung in the air between us, an unspoken invitation, a dangerous, tantalizing opportunity. My heart leaped. Was this her way of opening the door, of acknowledging what had happened, of offering a path back to that intoxicating, forbidden intimacy? But then I saw the cool, professional mask firmly in place, the subtle, almost imperceptible, warning in her eyes. And I knew, this wasn't an invitation, this was a test. A test of my resolve, of my ability to maintain the facade, to play the game, to pretend that the antechamber and everything that had happened within it had never existed. And in that moment, a cold, hard knot of resentment, of anger, of a profound, bitter disappointment formed in my chest. She wanted to forget. She wanted to pretend. She wanted to erase the memory of our shared passion, of the raw, uninhibited connection we had forged in the heat of that stolen, forbidden moment. Well, I wouldn't make it easy for her. I wouldn't let her off the hook that easily. No, coach, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, my gaze meeting hers, direct and unwavering. There's nothing to talk about. I'm fine. Just focused on my training. A flicker of something. Surprise? Disappointment? Crossed her face. So fleeting I might have imagined it. Then, her expression hardened, her professional mask firmly back in place. All right then, Lena, she said, her voice cool, dismissive. But be careful. Don't push yourself too hard. We wouldn't want you to break. Break. The word, spoken with such cool, deliberate precision, was like a slap in the face. And as I walked out of her office, my head held high, my heart a cold, hard knot of anger, and a strange, perverse, and undeniably compelling determination. I knew that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The game had changed. The rules had been rewritten. And I, Lena, the quiet, predictable girl, who had always played by the rules, was about to learn how to break them. All of them. The massage. It wasn't an official team thing, not something listed on the training schedule or offered to everyone. It was an arrangement. Coach Thorne had a small, private room off the main training facility, a space sparsely furnished with a professional-looking massage table, a few anatomical charts on the wall, and an array of oils and lotions that smelled faintly of eucalyptus and something else, something warmer, spicier, something that reminded me, with a sharp, unwelcome pang, of her. She'd mentioned it casually one afternoon, after a particularly brutal practice session had left my muscles screaming in protest, my body aching with a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. "You're tight, Lena," she'd said, her voice cool, professional, her blue eyes, those startling, piercing orbs, scanning me with an unnerving, clinical precision. "Your hamstrings, your glutes, you're carrying a lot of tension. It's affecting your form, your recovery time." I'd nodded, too tired, too sore, to offer much of a response. "I have some experience with sports massage," she'd continued, her gaze unwavering. "It can be beneficial, if you're interested. No obligation, of course. No obligation." The words, so innocuous. Yet in the context of our shared, unspoken history, they felt laden with a dangerous, tantalizing subtext. My heart had hammered against my ribs, a familiar, frantic rhythm. Part of me, the sensible, rational part, had screamed at me to decline, to run, to escape this new, potentially perilous manifestation of our complicated, forbidden dynamic. But another part, a reckless, desperate part, a part that was still reeling from the intoxicating memory of her touch, her taste, her scent, a part that craved, with an almost unbearable intensity, any form of connection with her, however risky, however inappropriate, had found itself nodding, agreeing, a silent, treacherous capitulation. And so, I found myself, a few days later, standing awkwardly in that small private room, the scent of eucalyptus and something else, something warm and spicy, filling my senses, my heart pounding, my palms clammy. Coach Thorne was there, dressed not in her usual tracksuit, but in loose, comfortable black pants and a soft, gray t-shirt that clung to her lean, athletic frame in a way that was both casual and devastatingly, unexpectedly, sensual. Her dark hair was pulled back, as usual, but a few stray tendrils had escaped, softening the severe lines of her face, making her look younger, more approachable, almost vulnerable. "All right, Lena," she said, her voice calm, professional, though I thought I detected a faint, almost imperceptible, tremor in it. Undress to your comfort level. Lie face down on the table. There's a sheet to cover yourself. She turned away then, busying herself with arranging the oils and lotions on a small side table, granting me a semblance of privacy, a gesture that felt both considerate and strangely, disconcertingly, intimate. My fingers fumbled with the buttons of my shirt, my movements clumsy, uncoordinated. My mind was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Fear, certainly, a cold, clenching dread that settled in the pit of my stomach, but also a strange, perverse, and undeniably compelling excitement. A frisson of illicit anticipation that coursed through my veins like a potent, dangerous drug. I stripped down to my underwear, my skin prickling with a mixture of cold air and a nervous, self-conscious heat. I lay down on the table, the cool, clean linen, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging within me, and pulled the sheet up to my waist, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I was sure she could hear it. I heard her approach, her footsteps soft, almost silent, on the tiled floor. I closed my eyes, bracing myself, every nerve ending alive, screamingly aware of her proximity. I felt the warmth of her hands as they hovered above my back, a silent, almost reverent preparation. And then, she touched me. Her hands, strong and surprisingly warm, settled on my shoulders, her fingers beginning to knead the tense, knotted muscles with a firm, professional pressure. It should have been relaxing. It should have been therapeutic. But this was Coach Thorne. And nothing between us, I was beginning to realize, could ever be simple, ever be innocent. Her touch, even in this clinical, professional context, was electric, sending shivers of awareness, of a forbidden, illicit pleasure, through my entire body. I tried to relax, to breathe deeply, to focus on the purely physical sensation of her hands, working away the tension in my muscles. But my mind, my treacherous, wayward mind, kept replaying other touches, other moments, the memory of her lips on mine, of her body pressed against mine in the shadowy intimacy of that antechamber, of the raw, uninhibited passion we had shared. Her hands moved lower, down my back, her thumbs pressing into the tight muscles along my spine, eliciting a series of involuntary gasps, of soft, betraying moans that I tried, unsuccessfully, to stifle. "Relax, Lena," she murmured, her voice a low, husky caress close to my ear, her breath warm against my skin. "Just breathe, breathe." How could I breathe when her hands were on my body, when her scent was filling my senses, when the memory of our shared transgression was a living, breathing entity in the small, charged space between us? Her hands moved with a skill, a precision that was both impressive and deeply unsettling. She knew just where to touch, just how much pressure to apply, just how to coax a response from my unwilling, yet undeniably eager, flesh. It was a dance, a silent, intimate conversation, a dangerous, intoxicating exploration of the boundaries between pleasure and pain, between therapy and something else entirely, something darker, something deeper, something that terrified me and thrilled me in equal, devastating measure. And as her hands moved lower still, towards the curve of my hips, towards the sensitive, aching flesh of my glutes, I knew, with a certainty that was both a surrender and a rebellion, that this massage, this ostensibly professional, therapeutic intervention, was about to go too far. Much, much too far. And a part of me, a reckless, desperate, and utterly, hopelessly infatuated part, couldn't wait.